Hello guys, welcome back. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. In the year 1837, within the quiet and religious bounds of Lancaster County, there lived four sisters whose faces were known for their beauty and modest grace, yet whose hearts carried storms darker than the coal smoke that drifted across the winter sky. Their home stood at the edge of the woods near a narrow creek where the sound of water often drowned out whispers of deceit that moved among them. The eldest sister was a woman of commanding silence, a presence that spoke through her eyes, rather than her tongue. And though people around believed her to be wise and gentle, she harbored a bitterness that had been nurtured through years of jealousy and restraint. She had seen dreams crumble beneath the weight of her duty to family, and began to believe that the world owed her more than her humble life could offer. Her sisters, younger and more naive, followed her words as if they were gospel, trusting her guidance without question, unaware that her love had twisted into something cruel and vengeful. The second sister possessed charm and laughter that could warm even the coldest of souls. Yet beneath her smile lay a thirst for freedom that society denied her. She felt trapped within the confines of the family home where every decision was dictated by her elder sibling and every joy measured against a moral code too strict for her heart. She longed for adventure, for love, for power, and the promise of wealth that could lift her beyond her station. It was she who first whispered, the idea that they could reshape their fate through their own hands, but it was the eldest who shaped those whispers into a plan dark and deliberate. The third sister, delicate and easily swayed, was caught between fear and devotion. Her spirit longed for peace, but she feared being left alone in a world that seemed ready to swallow women who dared to stand apart. She followed not out of desire, but out of terror, afraid that disobedience would lead her into ruin. The youngest was a child of silence, barely grown into womanhood, her innocence a fragile thing surrounded by shadows. She loved her sisters deeply and believed their words without question, for to her they were both mother and protector. When she saw them gather at night, speaking in low voices, she thought they were praying, not plotting. When they told her to stay quiet, she obeyed. When they handed her objects stained with secrets, she hid them, believing it to be an act of loyalty. The plan that the eldest sister wove began with a single death disguised as an accident. A man from the village had wronged them, or so she claimed. He had stolen what little inheritance their late father left behind, leaving them in debt and disgrace. The eldest convinced her sisters that the world would never give justice to women like them, and that sometimes one must take it with their own hands. And so they did, under the pale light of a crescent moon, with trembling fingers and hearts pounding like drums of war. The deed was done swiftly, yet the silence that followed was heavy and unending. The sisters told themselves it was over, but guilt is a seed that never dies. It grew in the soil of their minds, fed by fear and memory. The second sister began to dream of the dead man calling her name. The third could no longer look at her own reflection without trembling. The youngest wandered the halls at night, whispering prayers into the dark corners, hoping the voices would go away. But the eldest she did not fear. She felt a strange sense of triumph, as if she had conquered fate itself. She believed that they had done what was necessary, that they had proven their strength against a cruel and unjust world. Her heart no longer felt guilt, only power, and with power came the hunger for more. When another stood in their way, she found reason once more to justify blood. When envy burned within one sister's heart, she found the courage to strike again. What began as vengeance became habit. What started as desperation became sport. The four sisters, each bound by loyalty and silence, continued down a path they could not escape. Their crimes grew bolder, their hearts colder, until even among themselves they began to distrust. The bond that once held them together now turned to poison. Each looked upon the other with suspicion, wondering who might break first. The youngest began to cry at night, whispering that she could hear the dead calling from beneath the floorboards. The third fell ill, haunted by visions that left her gasping and weak. The second took to wandering in the rain, muttering words of regret and shame. Only the eldest remained unmoved, certain that she could command even fate itself. But fate has a way of turning against those who think they own it. One small mistake, one forgotten trinket left behind, became the whisper that drew suspicion. A single clue unnoticed by their trembling hands led neighbors to question the events that had passed. Whispers grew into rumors. Rumors became investigation, and before long the truth began to crack through their carefully built lies. When the youngest was questioned, she trembled, unable to bear the weight of silence any longer. Her tears became confessions. Her words became chains that bound them all. The village that had once admired their grace now looked upon them with horror, seeing not sisters but serpents clothed in innocence. In the end they stood before judgment, their faces pale, their eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. They had believed, themselves invisible, untouchable, but the world they tried to outsmart caught them at last. Their beauty faded, their charm forgotten. They were left only with the memory of the lives they had taken and the bond they had shattered. They became the, cautionary tale whispered across Lancaster County, a story of four sisters who thought they could outwit destiny, but instead became prisoners of their own making. Each of the four sisters carried within her a different piece of the darkness that would one day consume them. And though they shared the same blood and roof, their hearts beat to very different rhythms that clashed beneath the surface of their fragile unity. The eldest sister was the mind of every deed, the one who could see patterns where others saw chaos, and who believed that through cunning and calculation, she could rewrite the laws of justice to favor her hand. She had grown used to being obeyed, for since their parents' death, the weight of survival had fallen upon her shoulders, and with that burden came pride and resentment. She saw herself as a ruler in a house of fools, and she began to shape her sisters not through love but through fear, whispering to them that the world would crush them unless they learned to crush first. Her coldness gave her control, her intelligence gave her power, and her power gave birth to cruelty. The second sister burned with emotion and vanity, her laughter echoing like sunlight in summer, yet her joy was only a mask for the hunger that never left her. She wanted more than life had given her, and the more she desired, the more she began to hate the cage that trapped her. She found herself drawn to the eldest not because she loved her, but because she feared the emptiness that would come without her direction. It was she who provided passion to the plans, feeding the fire with her ambition. She could charm anyone, smile away suspicion, and turn tears into tools, yet deep inside she loathed herself for every deceit she performed. Her guilt grew like a shadow that followed every step. Yet she could never stop, for she had already tasted the power that came with breaking the rules of a world that had always ignored her. The third sister was gentle like the sound of rain against glass, her spirit made for kindness and care. But the cruelty around her chipped at her like a sculptor breaking stone. She did not plan, she did not lead, she merely followed, hoping that by obeying she could keep her sister's love. She wanted peace, yet her silence became a weapon in their hands. Every time she failed to speak, every time she turned her gaze from the truth, her weakness became complicity. Her innocence became corruption. She wept in the quiet hours, unable to wash the blood that existed only in her dreams. For every act committed, she whispered prayers into the night, asking forgiveness from a God she feared might never hear her again. The youngest sister, still a child in the ways of the world, had eyes wide with trust and a heart that could not yet comprehend the nature of sin. She loved her sisters with the devotion of one who has never known betrayal, and when they asked her to help, she believed it was for good. She carried messages, hid objects, and stayed silent when strangers came to the door, believing each act a duty of loyalty. Her ignorance was their shield and her purity their disguise, for no one would suspect such innocence to dwell among the guilty. Yet as time passed, she began to feel the weight of something she could not name, a heaviness that clung to her sleep and made her wake in tears. She saw faces in the dark corners of her room, heard whispers that spoke her name, and felt a coldness that never lifted even under the warmth of daylight. Together they moved as one, yet each for her own reason, one for power, one for desire, one for fear, and one for love. Their unity was built on lies, and their loyalty born from desperation. The eldest directed their every motion, turning jealousy into strategy and pain into purpose. She would speak of fairness and justice, but her meaning was vengeance. She taught them that the world was cruel, and that only those willing to strike first could survive. She painted murder as mercy, theft as reparation, and deceit as wisdom. And because they were lost and afraid, they believed her. They followed her commands and played their parts. The second with her charm, the third with her silence, the youngest with her obedience. But even the strongest bonds cannot withstand the weight of secrets for too long. In time, the cracks began to show. The second sister grew restless, tormented by the ghosts of her conscience. Her smiles faltered, her laughter broke into sobs in the dead of night. The third withdrew into sickness, her body bearing the burden of a soul too fragile for guilt. The youngest wandered aimlessly, clutching trinkets and murmuring prayers, her eyes hollow with confusion. And the eldest, who once seemed unshakable, began to see her control slipping from her grasp. She could not understand why her sisters trembled, why their hands shook, why they no longer met her gaze. She had built an empire of silence and obedience, yet it was crumbling from within. When one of their deeds left behind a trace too visible to ignore, suspicion fell upon them. The neighbors whispered of strange happenings, of visitors who never returned, of nights filled with muffled cries. The youngest was questioned first, and though she tried to hold her tongue, her tears betrayed her. Her trembling words lit the fire that consumed the rest. In the end, the truth came not from strength, but from weakness, and the pact they had sworn to keep forever was broken by the softest voice among them. The eldest raged, the second despaired, the third collapsed, and the youngest wept until her heart gave way. Their story became a symbol of how, even within a single family, evil can take many forms, of how intellect without conscience leads to tyranny, how passion without restraint leads to ruin, how silence becomes a partner to sin, and how innocence can be twisted into a tool of guilt. Each sister was a reflection of a different part of the human soul, and together they showed that no crime is ever truly shared, for every heart carries its own weight of darkness, and every conscience pays its own price. Their downfall did not come through confession or justice freely sought, but through the smallest of mistakes, a forgotten trace that spoke louder than their silence. A single clue left behind became the unraveling thread that pulled apart the tapestry of deception they had woven with such care. It was a locket, a trinket once belonging to the man whose life had been taken, the first of their sins. A villager found it half buried near the creek, where the body had been discovered. Its chain snapped, its surface engraved with initials known to all. The sight of it stirred old whispers, for though the man had been buried, his disappearance had never been fully understood, and many still wondered why his death seemed wrapped in quiet unease. When the locket was shown to the town elders, they began to question anew, and it was then that eyes turned toward the house of the four sisters, a place once seen as a pillar of grace, now viewed with uneasy curiosity. The sheriff came quietly, one gray, mourning his boots echoing on the wooden porch as he called for the eldest sister. She met him at the door, her voice calm, her gaze steady, yet behind that calm lay a flicker of something sharp and defensive. He asked her simple questions about the night of the disappearance, about the man, about the creek, and she answered with the precision of one who had rehearsed every word for years. But lies, no matter how polished, tremble when touched by truth. And as he spoke, she felt the weight of all she had done pressing down upon her shoulders. The other sisters watched from the hallway, pale and silent, their hearts drumming like trapped birds. The youngest clutched her apron, unable to meet his eyes, while the second bit her lip until it bled, and the third leaned against the wall as though her knees would give way. In the days that followed, the investigation grew deeper, and with every visit came more unease. Neighbors began to speak of things they had seen: lights flickering late at night, the smell of smoke drifting from the back fields, strange shapes moving through the orchard. The sisters tried to keep their composure, but cracks formed in their unity. The youngest began to weep in her sleep, whispering the names of the dead, while the third spoke less and less, retreating into silence as if her voice itself had become dangerous. The second grew frantic, pacing through the halls, clutching her chest, muttering that they would all hang. The eldest tried to steady them, reminding them of their oath, but even her words began to lose their power, for fear had entered their home. And fear is a guest that cannot be silenced. When the sheriff returned for a final questioning, it was the youngest he turned to, for she had the eyes of one who could not bear deceit. He asked her gently if she remembered the night by the creek, if she knew who had gone out or what had happened. Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears, and though she tried to speak, the truth tangled itself in her throat. She looked toward her sisters, hoping for strength, but saw only coldness in the eldest, despair in the second, and emptiness in the third. In that moment, her heart broke beneath the weight of their deeds. She fell to her knees and began to cry out words that spilled like blood, confessing what her innocence could no longer contain. She told of the plan, the meeting by moonlight, the whispered prayers, the trembling hands that had done the unspeakable. The sheriff stood in stunned silence as the truth unfolded, the sound of her voice shattering years of secrecy. The eldest lunged forward, trying to silence her, but it was too late. The words had escaped the house and could not be taken back. The second screamed, the third fainted, and the youngest wept until her voice was gone. They were taken into custody, their names carried through the county like a curse. People gathered outside the jail whispering that the angels of Lancaster had fallen, that their beauty had been only a mask for evil. The trial was swift, for the evidence now matched the confessions, and no defense could cleanse the stain. They stood side by side, their faces pale beneath the courtroom's light. Each carried a different burden, the eldest cold and unrepentant, the second trembling with regret, the third barely able to stand, and the youngest hollow-eyed and broken. The townspeople watched with pity and horror, unable to reconcile the gentle sisters they once knew with the monsters before them. When the verdict was read, there was no sound but the rustle of skirts and the faint sob of the youngest. The eldest lifted her chin, defiant to the end, whispering that she would rather burn than beg. The second fell to her knees, pleading for mercy. The third whispered prayers for forgiveness, and the youngest could only stare into nothingness. Her confession had freed her soul, yet destroyed her bloodline. In their final hours, they were kept apart, each alone with her memories, the silence of their cell pressing against their hearts like stone. The eldest spent her last night writing in a book no one ever read. The second sang lullabies through tears. The third clutched a cross carved from wood, and the youngest begged the guards to tell her sisters she was sorry. When morning came, the sky was heavy with rain, as if the heavens themselves mourned their fate. They were led out one by one, faces pale, hair loose, eyes hollow. The townspeople gathered not in hatred, but in sorrow, for they had learned that evil often wears the face of love and that cruelty can be born from pain. The eldest was the last to speak, her voice cold as iron. She said they had only taken what life had denied them. Then silence fell. The punishment was carried out swiftly, and by dusk the four sisters of Lancaster County were no more. Yet their story lived on, whispered across generations, as a warning that no secret stays buried forever, and that even the smallest clue can awaken the truth they fought so hard to hide. In the quiet fields near the old creek, people still say that on stormy nights you can hear the sound of four voices carried on the wind, not crying, not laughing, but whispering the same word over and over forever.